Year. I'm thrilled to welcome Clarissa Ward, who, as you probably know, worked for Fox News, ABC, CBS, and today is CNN's multi-award winning chief international correspondent. Please welcome, we've had live from Beijing, Rome, Capitol Hill, and on the stage at the Grand Hyatt, but now live from London. Welcome, Clarissa.
Hello. So good to be with you.
So good to be with us. You were so brilliant, as you always are. Last year, we wanted to have you in here and learn from you. And it is fabulous. And you're not going to be surprised, but I want to start. We've been talking a lot about Ukraine, and given what just happened, literally in the last 24 hours, I'm going to talk to Ambassador Markarova, who we saw last night. I'm going to talk with her this afternoon, but I want to talk with you. You have literally, since day one, brought the war into our living rooms and our homes with the harshness and the optimism in the stories, and it's been profound. And I want to remind the audience what Clarissa does for us with a 30-second clip of what you did. Watch for a second.
Можно вам помочь? Можно вам помочь? Мне очень жарко. Это плохая. Можно вам помочь? Давайте мне вот это. Давайте мне. I'm just going to help her carry this bag a second. Excuse me, John, while we try to... Ну вот. Ничего страшного, ничего страшного. Как вас зовут?
Amazing. She's in the middle of reporting and she stops to help this woman get through this harsh. I mean, amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you.
But that's not all, my friends, because this is the question I'm going to ask her. Clarissa goes back in February for 12 weeks of reporting, 20 weeks pregnant. Take a look at this picture. There she is. Congratulations. You just had your third son, which is why she's live in London and not here. So congratulations to you. So here's my question. Clarissa, what did you see in your reporting just in February? What's the resolve, the fear, the hope of the people you saw? What's happening there? Welcome.
So thank you so much for that gracious introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you again. I think what you see now in Ukraine is still that incredible resolve, still that determination. People understand they have come so far and they are not about to quit now. And with that, I think comes a lot of exuberance for the possibility that they might be able to deal a decisive blow to Russia once and for all. But at the same time, I think we have to be very clear about the enormity of the cost and the enormity of the sacrifice. And I spent a lot of time in areas of Ukraine that have been liberated, that have been taken back from Russian forces. And I have to tell you, victory is not pretty. Victory is towns and villages that have been smashed to pieces, where there are no basic amenities, where women told me stories of being raped, where men told me stories of losing their families, where elderly people are living on their own in the wreckage of bombed out buildings and trying to survive. So it's ugly and it's brutal, and the people of Ukraine are suffering enormously. And I think it's so important for us to never lose sight of that. But there's no question, they are in it to win it. They are determined, they are steadfast, they are strong, and they are some of the most innovative and creative and quick learners that I have ever witnessed fighting any war anywhere.
Extraordinary. So I have to ask you, when you say in it to win it, I have to ask you about the other side, Putin. You speak 7 languages. Russia is one of them. You lived in Moscow when you were reporting for ABC. Putin has lost 100,000 lives, as reported, 100,000 injured. What is his capacity to stay the long game? What's your reporting from that end?
He has no other choice. I think that privately, President Putin would certainly recognize that this was an error, this war, that he had probably been given falsely rosy information from his subordinates, and that ultimately he went in with a very optimistic idea of how things were going to play out. It clearly hasn't happened that way. That said, conceding defeat or conceding a mistake is not an option for him. This is now an existential battle. He only survives as long as that war keeps grinding on, or as long as he can somehow try to make out like he has created some form of victory. So this is the most challenging element of the Russian side of this. It's not their weaponry, it's not their expertise, it's not their manpower, because they have shown themselves to be very flawed on those levels. It's the fact that for Putin, it's win and or continue or die. And so, because it is such a stark question for him, I think he will do anything and everything in his power to keep this war going until he can find some way to fashion it into a win for his people.
And Clarissa, when you are walking the streets of Ukraine, they're sending their children to school, they're going to work. What's the flavor on the street? They're going to restaurants, and then the sirens go off and they go to the shelters. What does it feel like?
This is the thing that I think is really difficult to appreciate from outside, because obviously in the news we're really focused on the brutality and the heartache and the destruction. But in Kiev today, you can't get a table at a restaurant on Saturday night if you don't have a reservation. And so this was a big part of why I made the decision to go to Ukraine while I was heavily pregnant. I wasn't on the front lines, but I understood that there was excellent medical care, that life did in pockets of the country continue pretty much as normal. I don't want to say normal in the sense that everyone in the audience will be thinking of normal, okay? There's still air raid sirens almost every day. There's still drone attacks on a regular basis. There's still people having to send their loved ones to the front lines. So there's nothing normal about it, but the Ukrainians are so stoic and so strong and so determined that it's almost become a point of pride, I think, that they refuse to have their way of life really degraded and so they will keep having art exhibitions, and the ballet will go on, and the opera will go on, and the restaurants will stay open. And that, I think, really speaks to this spirit and to this determination to win. Whether they can win or not, honestly, depends on a number of different factors. We're seeing the beginning of this counteroffensive. These will be decisive moments and months ahead in which we will get a better sense, I believe, of what the ultimate trajectory or outcome of this war will be.
How many times did you have to go? Did you have an air raid and you have to go into shelter when you were there?
Honestly, when you've spent a lot of time, you stop going to the shelter at a certain point, because they have an incredible app that tells you what prompted the air raid. And so there are certain things which are serious enough that you'd probably consider taking shelter, and there are others that are more precautionary, and you get used to it, and it goes off at 3 in the morning, and you're like, you know what, I really just need that extra 2 hours right now.
I can appreciate that at 20 weeks pregnant. All right, I'm going to switch gears. I want to get your take on this. You have reported from Iran in your past, and I want to get your take on the protests that we saw last fall that were led primarily by young women, and what your take on it, if it means anything for the future. And I'm interested, as a woman who has reported a lot from the Middle East and kind of advantage, disadvantage, how that played out.
So, for my part, being a woman in the Middle East, I think has actually been an advantage for me, or I have decided to view it that way, because traditionally, I think women are seen, especially in very conservative societies, as being less of a threat than my male Western colleagues might be perceived. The women of Iran are nothing short of extraordinary. And I think what blows my mind, and which I have seen time and time again, but really reinforced in Iran, is that women refuse to be victims. Women are warriors in their own right and their own way. And they are determined, and they are fighting back, and they are engaging in bold acts of daring, and they are essentially thumbing their nose at a regime of septuagenarian clerics who have spent decades now dictating how women should dress, how they should behave, what they should be able to do in society. And so while the protests have quieted down for now, there's no putting this genie back in the bottle. And I think a lot of people understand that when there finally is a leadership change in Iran, when the Ayatollah dies, that there will be a real chance at that moment of, a sort of revolution or an uprising to be more successful. This time, it was basically quashed with brute force. Don't forget the Iranians supported Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They've seen how this playbook works. It is remarkably effective. If you kill and murder and torture and maim people, eventually they will stop coming out. For now. But in the long run, I don't think you have seen the loss of the Iranian women yet, not by any stretch of the word, by any stretch. And I continue just to be humbled, honestly, by their courage.
I love your optimism. Let's stick with women, and I'm going to turn to Afghanistan. You've done a ton of reporting there. I think there's a lot of concern about the women and girls of Afghanistan. What's your take on what's happening there right now?
It is a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. And I know that people in the audience right now are probably thinking, oh my gosh, it's too much. There's too much in the world. Like, how do we have the bandwidth to be engaged and feel empathy and compassion and really try to get our head around all these terrible situations? But in Afghanistan, you have something that as an American, I have found particularly heartbreaking, which is that for 2 decades, women were told, you can dream. You can have big dreams. You can send your daughter to school. You can be a judge. You can be a politician. You can do what you want. Yes, it's still a conservative society, but you have basic fundamental rights and they are protected. And we will help you do whatever we can to achieve those. And then in the blink of an eye, and I'll never forget this woman coming up to me as I was on the streets in the days after the Taliban took over. And this woman said to me, she pulled me aside and she says, what do I tell my daughters? What do I tell my daughters? Because for years I told them that they could be whatever they wanted to be. Now, at the same time, in the face of this heartache, and obviously Afghanistan's not a monolith and it's a different situation in Kabul to, the situation that you might find in Taliban strongholds. And there are plenty of women who support the Taliban and don't think of these issues in the same way. But what I also found going back more recently, again, Afghan women are not victims. They're not sitting home and crying about it. They're setting up secret schools. They're setting up vocational centers where they can go and continue to study. They're applying for every single possible fellowship, scholarship, grant, whatever they can to further their studies overseas. Now, the sad thing is that those options are not available, clearly, to the majority of women, but they continue in their own right to fight. And I don't know where it will end, honestly. And more broadly, you have this backdrop of extreme poverty, of severe hunger, of instability in terms of the security of the country. So I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. It is grim.
I love your honesty, but you keep finding this hope of some optimism, as I said in your introduction. So I'm going to go to another trouble spot because that's where you report from. For decades, you've been reporting on refugees. You had your, landmark reporting at the Syrian war. Today, we have 100 million refugees, people displaced in the world, the largest historic in the world. I'd welcome how you see the refugee crisis of today, if it's different or if it's not from your earliest reporting that you've been doing for almost 2 decades.
It has spiraled to a place where I don't think any of us could have predicted. And it has become abundantly clear that when you have instability in the world, when you have a kind of power vacuum at the top, there are consequences. And that consequence is a mass migration of humanity, whether it's because of war, whether it's because of climate change, whether it's because of intense poverty, the net result or the end result is the same. I think that what you see today that is a little disturbing is how politicized the debate and discussion around refugees has become and around displacement. It's taken on a very toxic tone, which is not only unhelpful, but also, I would just argue, doesn't really address what the core issues are and doesn't really help us to get our arms around this problem and think about how we act globally to counter this catastrophe, or at least to meet the moment. Because the other thing to keep in mind is this isn't going away. With climate change moving in the direction that it clearly is, there are parts of the Middle East that will be uninhabitable in 40 years' time. So this is only going to become more of a challenge. And I really hope that we can continue to focus on it in the news and continue also to try to take the politics out of it for a second and just talk about it in human terms, but also in strategic terms, just like you saw in your panel before.
Clarissa, just out of curiosity, how easy is it for you to get into some of these difficult places? I mean, just as a reporter, getting in and out from a security point of view, from a mobility point of view, is just the reporting more complicated today? Roads? I mean, I just keep thinking about how you're just moving around as a reporter.
It's complicated, definitely. I would also say it's riskier in many ways. At a certain point in the past, I would say post 9/11 era, reporters became fair game. And we have seen so many of my friends, my personal friends and colleagues who have been killed and kidnapped and targeted and tortured. And again, we see journalists more frequently as well, particularly local journalists coming under attack in their own countries, being threatened. And so it's a difficult time to be a journalist, and it is challenging to be able to do this work. I would say that honestly, having the benefit of a huge institution like CNN, with all the knowledge and experience and wisdom that comes with those three letters, makes it possible to do this work. Otherwise, it is incredibly difficult and you are incredibly vulnerable.
So 2 quick last questions. What happens if America doesn't show up? We're here as advocates to talk about American global leadership. When America isn't out there and leading, do you see a difference?
You definitely see a difference. You see, this shouldn't come as a shock. The US has traditionally been the sort of leader of the free world, right? You can't just pull away from that role or take a step back from it and not have a domino effect. And I see it and feel it most keenly because I'm traveling around the world and talking to US allies or people or countries that have traditionally been US allies. They feel it. They feel like they're being left out, hanging in the breeze, and they don't have that assurance. I think that obviously we live in a multipolar world and people understand that. But the idea, and I also understand the idea that, when you're America, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You get too involved, people criticize you. You don't get involved, people criticize you. That's just life. That's just life. And ultimately, I can definitely tell you from firsthand experience that the leadership of the US in the world is really relied upon by many different actors, particularly in this moment of democracies versus autocracies, which is the kind of pivotal geopolitical dynamic of our time.
So, Clarissa, maybe you can end here. As I watch your reporting as often as I can, and I feel like you see the absolute worst of humanity and you see the best of humanity. And one of the reasons I watch you is because you bring out that best. Can you share, maybe in your recent trip, where that hope is? Because thank goodness you go and you report from these harshest places, but I'd love you to share with us where you find that soulful hope and optimism.
Yeah, I mean, you find it in these moments, and it's my frustration, Liz, sometimes that it's really hard to get that into the news, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be on the front page.
Unfortunately.
Like these small acts of kindness, these small acts of heroism, of generosity. You know, I spent the day or 2 days with a volunteer in Ukraine who left his family who were in Europe, went back into Ukraine, and day and night drives to the front lines to collect the bodies of dead Ukrainian soldiers to take them back to their families, because he understands that even though it doesn't change the loss that these families are experiencing, having that closure is so important to them. And he's not getting paid anything to do it. He's not part of any formal organization. He is risking his own life every day. He is a volunteer, and he does it simply as an act of kindness and mercy to these families because he understands the value of being able to say goodbye and burying your dead. It is just one example. I see so many times people, just a small gesture, offering someone some food, giving them a ride, putting their arm around someone. And you see there is beauty and compassion and a very real and vivid and vibrant current of humanity that weaves among us all and binds us together. And when I see that, that's what inspires me and gives me the courage and the hope to keep doing this job, even though I am so often confronted with the flip side of that, with the darkness and with the evil.
Well, thank you on behalf of all of us for bringing the light into your stories. Thank you, Clarissa Ward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.